Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. And today I'm going to talk about the book written by John Lennon's tarot card reader because it is out of control. And you're going to listen because it's my land. And because the story is crazy. Listen, I don't have a problem with tarot cards. I really, truly don't. It's just that I have a problem with this guy. This guy is John and Yoko's tarot card reader. Now, specifically, it started with Yoko, but it turned into John. And this guy, John Green, or also known as Charlie Swan, because apparently Yoko says that nobody can be named John in John's orbit because I'm already going on a spiral because it is this crazy. Dakota Days by John Green. I'm pretty sure I filmed the whole thing without saying the title of the book. Before I get into this book, I want you to understand one thing. This guy has written this from memory. A lot of it is that he claims to be verbatim, but does not mention how it was recorded, and he claims that he has a very good memory. The rest of it was recreations and put together in the way that these people spoke. Now, later in the book, that basically means pulling from exact quotes from John's interviews, so I'm sure that they really were super close. So essentially, I'm going to be reading from what we should consider a tabloid of someone who does have a credible long-term relationship with John and Yoko. But holy crap, the credibility on this. This will be the first video in my Researching the Beatles series. That series was supposed to be chronological until I read this book. This book has changed the entire trajectory of what I assume to be at least 28-part series. Fuck this book. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beep, 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 beep. New Beatles shirt. New Beatles shirt. New. If you've never been to my land before, basically what I do here is talk about what I want, which is mostly the Beatles and sometimes TV commentary. I've been working on a long form video essay on the TV show Lost for a really long time. And if I don't mention it in every single video that I do, I will see the bent neck lady. And I really don't want that for myself. So I would absolutely love it if you'd like and subscribe and all of that jazz. It really helps me out a whole lot. And before we go back to my land, I just wanted to let you know that TV tilts. This chair is super loud and I've got the driest eyes in the country. I haven't been crying. It's just the way I look. Now let's go back to my land. So this book basically starts in 1974 to 1976 when this guy, who I'm going to just refer to as Charlie because that's what he's referred to throughout the book, even though his name is John Green, when Charlie started to become in Yoko's employ. Now that's during the Lost weekend when John and Yoko were amicably split up and he was dating May Pang, who was Yoko's assistant. It was orchestrated by her and it was an open relationship until it kind of wasn't. And all of a sudden it's a deal breaker while John and Yoko were broken up. Here's the thing. There are so many conflicting reports about all of this, and I am not an expert on the Lost Weekend. There are a lot of conflicting reports as to whether or not Yoko and John spoke at all during this point. Some people say that they called and that she called every single day. According to this guy, he was reading tarot cards and finding out the likelihood of where John was in motels in Florida. So what Yoko was saying is this guy knows exactly where John is because of the tarot cards, and what it was kind of like maybe this one, maybe that one. Brief aside, I do know a little bit about tarot, anything with spirituality as a very personal thing, and I take everything with kind of a grain of salt. Tarot cards are not meant to tell the future. That's not what they're there for. They're given for themes, and I would say mostly you do a reading and it gives you an introspection on maybe a guideline of what might help you communicate and move through some sort of situation. I don't do it a lot, but I like it. This guy and I have very different views on tarot, I guess. And this guy had been, according to him, reading tarot for 18 years. I have been into tarot. I don't read. I don't like read people for like 3 years. Okay. No, 5 years. I lost 2020 to 2021. I just, those years don't exist. I guess if it's regarding tarot, maybe I'd listen to this guy. However, when he's talking about his readings and talking about the cards that he pulls, he has like names for the cards. So rather than saying like, that's a 7 of Pentacles, he'll say, that is the blah, blah, blah card, or that is the yaka yaka. And he will, yaka yaka? Who says that? Has anyone ever said that? I have never said that. What just happened? As far as anything he talks about tarot-wise, I still don't really know what he's talking about. Any sort of like translation or interpretation that I could make, I can't make because he uses different names for it. And maybe that's on purpose, but I don't know. Now I'm just gonna go through the book because it is wild. There's a lot of times when I read really fast during this. I'm so sorry. I do slow down later on, so don't click off. Just bear with me, okay? I'm doing my best. According to this guy, he was in Yoko's employ, and she said that if he delivers 7 tasks, then she will put him up for life. He will work for her full time for the rest of his life, room and board, all of that shit. So that's his thing. And here are the 7 tasks. The first task was to have John and May split up and John move back in with Yoko. The second is immigrations. John at this point was going through immigration, and Charlie even says that would settle itself in time. Number 3 is to stop the barrage of lawsuits against John. 4 is to establish an income for the two of you, being John and Yoko, which is independent of the record industry. 5, to create a new and favorable public image for Yoko. 6, to return John to the music industry. And 7 was a baby. Pretty early in the book, John is trying to figure out how to cut things off with May, and essentially May was still on the payroll even though he was living in the Dakota. Here's the thing that I don't know. It's hard to know because some people say that when John moved back in with Yoko, he never talked to May again, ever. Some people say that their dalliances continued. According to this, John wasn't talking to her. He was just trying to figure out how to do it. So then Charlie says, fire her, and that was basically it. But that begins this habit that Charlie has of taking credit for everything. John broke up with May and did the things with May. Well, thank God Charlie told him how to do it. I want to mention, this came out in 1982. This book is not favorable to John or Yoko. Remember what I said about tabloidism? I'm just going to read just passages, all right? Yoko's pregnant at this point. She's apparently shoveling chocolate into her face. That is his terms, not mine. Not doing anything, but then also restricting John's diet and making sure that he can't have coffee, only tea, and like people steal his cigarettes and all kinds of stuff. Mrs. Jones, not her real name, a woman with unique ability to serve the linens without being dominated by them, entered with tea. Where's Charlie's coffee? Demanded Yoko. Why didn't you bring coffee for my guest? Run and get some. I don't care for any coffee, Yoko, I said. You always like coffee. Now stop trying to be nice to the servants. Mrs. Jones disappeared. You're such a socialist, Charlie. Always defending the working class. That kind of person needs orders. If you weren't so poor, you'd understand that. Woof. John is not free from the line of fire. Charlie regularly brings up that John has been violent in the past. This is something that I've addressed a few times, but John has had a violent past with his partners and with other people. He's admitted to it, talked about it, and apologized for it. It's not my apology to accept, and it's not yours either. That doesn't stop Charlie from saying whatever he wants in this book. That only came out 2 years after John Lennon was murdered. Love this guy. So this is apparently the day after Sean was born, which Sean had to come from a C-section. Yoko was 42 when she had Sean. Yoko had a history of fertility issues with a ton of miscarriages. So this pregnancy was kind of scary, okay? A few days after Sean was born, October 9th, 1975, John calls Charlie and says, "It's not as though I've gained a son. It's more like I've lost a wife," he complained. "Nothing's worked out the way it was supposed to, you know. We had it all planned out. We'd have the baby at home," we said. "I would be there for the delivery," we said. "Natural birth, no problems," we said. "What was it all about? All the talk, all the plans. What did we get out of it? A healthy son." We get all of these like diatribes from John, and then Charlie responds with like these tiny sentences. All of this like angry ranting and then a healthy son. Oh, he's so right. Is this me popping off in hardcore defense of John Lennon and Yoko Ono? You bet your ass it is. By the way, my feelings toward Yoko are incredibly complicated to the point where they're so polarizing, where sometimes my feelings toward her are pretty good and sometimes they are so negative that I couldn't, like, in good conscience make a video about her, because I know that some people get Beatles information, like, think credibly from my opinion of the Beatles. And if I can't come to any sort of resolution on my feelings toward Yoko, then I have no business making a video about her. However, this is like pretty negative toward her, and I just don't think anybody deserves it. It's not going to stop me from reading it, though. Then Charlie says, have it your way. When a woman of any age goes about having a baby by eating a ton of chocolate, then fasting and going on radical diets, smokes like a fiend, and keeps herself in a state of constant agitation, she's lucky if she doesn't miscarry. Fuck you. Then John says, my, aren't you full of compassion and understanding? And then he says, not when it isn't needed, John, and not at 3 a.m. This guy is getting paid a salary from them. That does suck, though. And he does mention that Yoko would regularly call with emergencies, usually at some crazy hour, and just say, it's an emergency. And sometimes it would be nothing. So this starts out with Yoko being so concerned that John has been poisoned, and he's been poisoned by May. That is kind of a consistent theme, that Yoko's really concerned about Sean's health, so she's always having Charlie read on it. And Yoko's really concerned about John's mental health, and so she's always having him read on it. But it's always some emergency. So while this guy is getting paid a salary and he does do other readings and other things, that does kind of suck. But he's getting paid, you know. Later on in 1975, it seems like John and Yoko were having a lot of problems. He was like out, there were lots of trysts, and he talks about something that's pretty intense. John said basically that he was frustrated, you know, sexually and all kinds of stuff. This is what he said. Do you know what you are? I shouted, you're no fun. You know that, don't you? No fun at all. So as the whole room could hear me, cackled John, relating his version of the previous night's dispute with Yoko at Ashley's, a popular downtown watering hole. Then I say softly, just for her, you with that great moping face of yours. God knows I don't need you hanging around all the time. I could tell I was getting to her. She craves attention so much, I thought that I'd give her a good dose. Damn. And then he goes on to say, if I wanted to, I could make it worse, a lot worse. And then Charlie goes, and what does she do? And then John says, what can she do? Stay and take it or leave? She left. It was perfect. This is when the tarot card reader starts getting involved in the Lennons' finances. So he's obsessed with them making investments. And to be fair, Yoko is constantly asking him, along with, I should mention, witches and numerologists and other kind of psychic, all of these things just to make her plans. It starts with him reading one of the Apple contracts, and it seems like he has kind of a sort of despisal for Lee Eastman. There was a lot more tucked away in this massive document, as I discovered when I studied and read each of its countless provisions. Because of this, I advised Yoko against his signing, and Yoko relayed the information to John in Florida. He signed. As I had predicted, it did not turn out to be a wise decision. Oh, well, you know, you predicted it. The first business maneuver the Lennons ever executed solely under the direction of tarot cards was in the spring of 1975, after John's return from what he had begun to call his 18-month lost weekend. It was actually 15. John, anxious to reorder his existence, had been asking a series of questions about several people in his life. It was then the subject of his manager came up. I want to get rid of my manager, John announced. Every time I turn around, he's costing me more money. I thought managers were supposed to make money. What are your details of your contract with him? I sorted the cards. Like, it's just so, it's a lot. So Charlie asks him, why not just let him go? And John goes on to explain why, and then he says, and in the meantime, he can get a copy of everything and do a lot of damage. Charlie says, what kind of damage? And then John says, never you mind, Dem's my secrets, and I'll thank you to keep your nose out of them. Later in the book, things get a little intense. Yoko calls Charlie and tells him that she had to send John away because he was destroying everything. And I'm just going to read bits and I'll just let you know. Okay. So she's talking about a dispute and she says, finally, it got so bad. He attacked the baby. It was terrible. Attacked? John was a screamer and had a habit of yelling at Sean to stop crying, but attack sounded more serious. Yes, he kicked him. We were in the bedroom having our meditation. We were doing it almost every night because it was good for family harmony. We would sit naked in a little triangle because that's the symbol of ascension and just meditate. And if anyone had anything to say, they could just say it. Remember that this is all from memory, right? Okay. So So basically Sean starts crying and John is like, can you make the baby stop crying? I didn't really notice how angry the crying was making John because I was very deep into my meditation. All at once he stood up and I opened my eyes and I saw him walk towards Sean and I thought he was going to step on him, but then he just brought his foot up and kicked him. It was very vicious. Then he stood there looking stupid and the baby was screaming and I didn't know what was going to happen next. So I jumped up and grabbed Sean and took him to his room. I didn't even stop for a robe or anything. I was in such a hurry. I was afraid he was going to kill the baby. As Yoko's solution to this, she sends John out to like a vacation house and she sends Sean with him. But you sent Sean out there with him. Yes, John wanted to take him and I think Sean wanted to go too. You thought he was going to kill the baby, but you sent him out alone with the... Okay. I mentioned that Yoko has like a host of other psychics and people on call. Now, she decided that she was going to make a trip to meet a witch named Nora. Now, this is when we see in the book that Charlie has double standards for magic and he's very skeptical about other witches. Secretly, I was intrigued with the thought of meeting this would-be witch. What do you think she'll be like? Yoko queried. Who, Nora the witch? I don't know. If she's a real one, I suppose she'll be like most witches, friendly, a little musty, and full of tricks and mysteries. But apparently Nora passed the litmus test. We sat together in the gathering darkness, talking shop, exchanging rituals and recipes and half sentences as witches do. But Yoko had a list of things that she wanted Nora to work on, which included, I think you should do something for my career and my husband's career separately, but then something for our career together, but not for his career with someone else, because Yoko went on and on referring to her notes, and I just thought that that one was interesting. This is the post-it note that this bookmark got. At this point, things are not going well with John and Yoko. They are fighting a lot. John is really depressed. Charlie goes as far to say, maybe it's time to go see a therapist, have a mediator, and just like duke it out. And then John says, that's terrific. Then he goes off and makes a bundle, writing a book about the inner workings of our neuroses. Something that John wouldn't like, right? Huh. That sounds so familiar. I don't know. What the fuck? In 1977, they are planning a trip to Japan and preoccupied with fixing John's problems. And this is one of the monologues that she had, which I thought was interesting. No, I know what my problems are. You don't think I know myself, but I do. Freud said that insanity was having a problem and not being able to control it. Well, I control mine. I've created a very special world to do just that. I grew up in a family where my father wasn't there and my mother was a monster. My country was destroyed by war. My feelings and my work have never been respected, and people think that all I've ever done was marry John Lennon and spend his money. When you have a life like that, you have to protect yourself, and I've done a good job of it. I know I have problems, and I know I will never be able to solve them. I've learned how to live with them and live successfully. There is nothing you can tell me about it because it's been my life's work to learn about myself and survive as myself. And I just thought that was interesting. Further into the book, this embroilment with the finances just continue. And this guy he gives amazing financial advice. He's telling the Lennons that it's time to invest in farms. I do not know how this investment went out. I'm just talking about how this guy is a prick about it the entire time. So he's talking to John and says, well, you're always going on saying that you need a little bit of green to get away to once in a while. 2,000 acres is quite a bit of green. And even John in this says it. I know you, Charles, and I know it's the money angle that interests you. I've told you how I feel about the money thing. Let the government have it. I don't need an investment, as you call it. That is going to mean more work for Yoko and more business for me. And then Charlie says that he goes on to manipulate John and says, oh, you surprised me. I can't believe that you're giving money to the military. And he's like, how am I giving money to the military? And he's like, because you're paying taxes. So then John's like, okay, fine, I guess we'll buy the farms. It's shitty. That's not using tarot. That's just being manipulative. Apparently Charlie thinks this is a good idea. I don't know where tarot is mentioned in any of it. And he's trying to convince John. If he does mention tarot, it says like the cards say it was a good call. And then he goes on to convince John, and John is like out of control and blah, blah, blah. But thank God Charlie Swan is here with his good advice. I need to take out my contacts. They wind up getting the property, but then he says, when the Lennons finally closed the deal with the farms, they failed to take my advice and use a fiduciary and instead signed their own names to the contract. This presented both a security problem and a vandalism liability. Then there was a terrorism threat. Someone called the Dakota and said that he was going to hurt or shoot the Lennons, we, or should I say Yoko, got a call. This is John speaking. It was from I really don't know what to call him, a crank, a crazy. He called himself a terrorist. He wants money and he wants it fast. The joke is that at the moment, I don't have it to give him to him because he wants $200,000 and I would have to do some rather fast selling to get it by the time he wants it tonight. So there's this like theme of impending doom coming in. And he's like, the Lennons didn't take my advice about their security. He spends a lot of time talking about John's depression. Oh, hang on, my cat's like screaming. Sorry about the cat. There's gonna be a tail in the way. Apparently John spent a lot of time in his bedroom just watching TV without the sound on, and he says, here, look at that. His eye caught a Beatlemania commercial on the screen. Have you seen that show? No? You should. I did. There I was in the audience watching me on stage. It wasn't like the old days, of course. You can hear what these guys are doing, which you could never at our concerts because of all the screaming. They've made a copy that is superior to the original. The world doesn't need me. It has clones to do a better job. I don't even have to be alive. Isn't that convenient? John's depression gets worse. Charlie talks about how he doesn't really get to see him a whole lot. And then Yoko, who seems to be kind of obsessed with trips and numerology, Japanese numerology, and how trips and directions and numbers all coincide. She's always planning some sort of trip for John. And Charlie is kind of like, I don't know if you need another trip, blah, blah, blah. And Yoko starts planning it. He reads on maybe where they should go or whatever. But to his surprise, John goes on this trip and it was transformative. So I guess you can't see everything in those cards, can you, huh? I hate this guy. Then there's a point where Yoko's obsessed with making a musical. And during this point, she's talking about how she's written all of the music and that if people think John wrote the music, then they will come see the musical. But once they find out that it's hers, they'll be like, oh my God, she's a genius. At this point, he starts openly talking smack. This was one of Yoko's classic themes. In her heart, I think she honestly believed that if it weren't for some huge conspiracy against her, she would be the queen of rock and roll. I knew that I wouldn't be able to convince her with practical arguments that her plan had major holes in it, so I had to come up with something else. Well, you are still putting yourself in terrible danger. Think about it. Up on that stage every night, exposed to all those people, there is no telling what might happen. I would think about that very carefully if I were you. Man, he could wrap bacon around his hand and wave it in front of my face, and it would be less ham-fisted at this point. So almost at the end of the book, he talks about Paul getting busted with marijuana in Japan. And apparently this upset John. And this, out of all of the things, really does sound like John because he calls him and says, it's lousy, Charles. Typical, but lousy. Some petty official probably needed a promotion and set Paul up to get it. Not that I have any great love for the man, you understand, but this sort of thing is just somebody's cheap trick. And he goes on to just talk crap about it, and then he'll be like, not that I care or anything. So Charlie says, for someone you claim not to care about, you seem awfully upset. It's just the injustice of the thing that upsets me. If Paul were just somebody, the customs agent would have pulled the grass out of his bag and said, don't be stupid, son, just throw it away over there. And then this is what Yoko said about Paul. You know what? I'm actually just going to read a big chunk of it because it is so unhinged. I mean, it is crazy. Okay. This is Yoko talking, okay? It's a pity, really. I like Paul. I think of him as a friend. John is the one who doesn't like Paul. Paul was always the cute one, and John was jealous of that. When I first met Paul, I was very attracted to him. I'm like that when I really like someone. I try to get close to the guy who's close to the guy I like. That's why I was getting close to John, so I would be near Paul if he wanted to make a move. And Paul was attracted to me. I could see that. But he couldn't handle the idea of being attracted to somebody John was with because that's a violation of the fraternity rules. I was somebody else's property. That's how men think, you know. So then Paul was very frustrated because he wanted me and felt that he couldn't have me. That's why he always acted so mean to me. Men always think like that, you know. If they... It's so stupid. It's so stupid. And I could see her saying all of it. Like, if they can't have a woman, they want to punish her. But I think he was always a little interested because of the way he looked at me. Even when he used to come here with Linda, he was always looking at me funny when he knew Linda and John couldn't see him doing it. There were other things too, like he got married because John and I did. And then Charlie says, I thought that he got married to Linda before you married John. Well, he did, but he knew that John and I were planning to. So right away, he married Linda so he would get the headlines first. He's like John that way, very competitive. I think that if it wasn't for me, he would have never married Linda at all. And then she says, do you want to read on that and see how he's feeling about me? I did, and it didn't look like love. Disdain, maybe. Contempt, certainly, but definitely not love. He seems to have gotten over his infatuation with you. Are you sure? That's very funny. Well, he hasn't seen me in such a long time, so maybe that's it. Okay. Later in the book, John has gone on a sailing excursion. It was really cool for him. He and Sean were doing it. It somehow broke into some sort of musical muse for him. Now that John is writing music, according to this, Yoko is pretty upset about it. You don't know anything about music. I was the one who heard the song and it wasn't that good. I don't think that this will change anything. I think that he's just fooling himself again and that he's made some major change like he's always done, but nothing will come of it. Now, if you are through being a John Lennon fan, can we get back to the important things? And then like 2 hours later, she calls and says, he's written 2 more. And after that, she hung up. We're in 1980 here and they're talking about Double Fantasy release and the fact that John and Yoko are planning to go on a tour. Now, I'm just going to read here because once again, this is a, oh my God, Charlie knows everything. You are exposing yourselves more to the world and you have to step up security. So then Yoko says, we can't do that. What would people think? It would look as though we were afraid and that would only invite trouble. That's why I have to keep sending the bodyguard off on those little trips. I can't have him around. Besides, he makes me nervous. So then Yoko goes on to say that John protects her when she goes out in public and Charlie says, and who protects him? And she says, John's a man and men don't need to be protected in the same way a woman does. Now, this isn't getting us anywhere. At this point, she's making him read about which songs on Double Fantasy are going to be a hit, and she wants all of her songs to be in the top 10 or number ones. This goes on to show that Yoko really doesn't like criticism from this guy about her music, and he says, listen, if Beethoven chiseled out his pieces, I'm sure you can stand to make a few changes. And she says, I don't care what some dead composer supposedly did. He wasn't an artist anyway. If you think that being a craftsman is art, then I shit on you because you don't know anything about art, and I want you to tell me how to make these songs hits, but I'm not going to change any part of them. So yeah, and then shortly after this, John was murdered by the jerk of all jerks. But I guess if he had listened to Charlie's advice, that wouldn't have happened, right? This guy's a shithead. So anyway, do you hate him with me? Let's hate him together, all right? Okay, thanks for visiting my land. I love y'all so much. Y'all come back now, you hear? Bye.
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet